Hello there. During this COVID lockdown, I'm going to make a daily short video where I sort of indulge a little, think a bit about the lockdown, think a little bit about whatever random things are occupying my mind at the time. It's a nice little discipline, and it's just a nice little project to have during lockdown, and it's a nice thing to do when you head out for your daily exercise. I'm on a little bike ride at the moment. And so today I wanted to talk about two of the women that are in the front line of our Sydney lockdown. I'd like to talk about our Premier, Gladys and I'd like to talk about her, I think it's Chief Medical Officer, Kerry. They're both people we see every day in our COVID briefings, and I think they're both very interesting because right now, here in Sydney, we are in what is shaping up to be the worst lockdown in Australia this year. Very likely that's what it's going to end up being. And it follows from our Premier, Gladys being sort of presented to us as the gold standard manager of COVID, and that's because she's been very resistant to the idea of locking down. Our other state premiers in Australia, and there is a bit of a consensus on this, even across the parties, our other state premiers have gone for go hard, go fast strategy, which means if you have an outbreak, if your intention is to keep this thing completely at bay, then you go hard, you go fast, and that should work quickly. And that approach has been pretty much vindicated since the terrible outbreak in Victoria last year. So it's a bit interesting that our Premier, Gladys has chosen not to go with the consensus, but has preferred to be slow to lock down. Now, it is fair to say that in the past, Gladys's approach has worked. We've had a couple of minor outbreaks, and Gladys's soft touch has worked. The outbreaks have been contained. But like any preventative measure, like wearing seatbelts, like any kind of action that you might take for safety, wearing a life jacket, it works, you don't need it until you need it. And I think we can say the same thing applies here. Had we locked down harder, we would be in a much better position. And of course, there are many wiser people than I, many more informed people than I, who've been saying that since well before this became the disaster it is. But I wanted to focus on the fact that I actually feel a great deal of pity for Gladys. And of course, when you're issuing pity at the moment, you've got to remember there are people now who are massively impacted by this lockdown. There are people who are facing terrible hardship because we're going into what's going to be a long lockdown. But I do feel sorry for Gladys, and the reason I feel sorry for Gladys is because I actually think she's been pushed into a corner, and it would have been a very difficult corner for anybody to come out of. I think it definitely suits Gladys to be different to Dan Andrews and Mark McGowan, two other premiers that have made a name for themselves because they go hard very quickly. But lately, going hard quickly has meant freedom, liberty very quickly as well. And we're not facing that in Gladys's New South Wales. So she has resisted following the line of the others. She's liked being gold standard Gladys, and a big part of that has been a reluctance to lock down. And that strategy, just like seatbelts and life jackets and all kind of preventative measures you can take, fire extinguishers, that strategy's worked until it doesn't work. And I think the sort of judgment of risk Gladys has made has been very poor, but it's been poor based on the sort of prevailing orthodoxy of the party that she is a member of, and our Prime Minister and our Treasurer have both lauded her reluctance to go into lockdown, and so they've made it very difficult for her to deviate from that position. And for that reason I feel sorry for her. But there's more than that. In her own party, Gladys has people who are anti-lockdown. So she comes from a position where locking down is difficult because she doesn't have the support of her party. And then you have to remember that her party is very tightly wound up with the Murdoch-backed, psychopathic, unhinged media, which the Alan Joneses and Andrew Bolts, who speak stuff that is just so unhinged, so unscientific as to be just outrageous. So it is difficult for Gladys. So while of course I have disagreed with her throughout this sort of outbreak, I wanted her to go hard early, I feel sympathy for her. But the person I feel even more sympathy for is Kerry Chant, because every time Gladys gives a press conference, she basically passes responsibility for her approach to this outbreak to Kerry Chant. Now, I have tremendous regard for Kerry Chant, and I can't imagine the stress that she must be under. But I can't believe that Kerry Chant stood up in a room and said to Gladys, "Don't lock down. I don't want you to lock down." I can't buy that. I'm going to guess that this stuff, it's a process. Kerry Chant probably gives Gladys a set of options with some scenarios, and then Gladys makes the decision. Of course, she can still then say it's based on the scientific or the medical advice. But it is so implausible that Kerry Chant stood up in the room and said, "Gladys, you don't need to lock down. This outbreak is going to be contained using our soft touch approach." And the reason I say that it is utterly improbable that Kerry Chant would have done that is because Kerry Chant is a scientist and she's a medical person, and the consensus, both not just among our premiers but among our chief scientists around the country, is that lockdowns, going fast, going hard, are a good thing. I'm sure there are some exceptions to that view, but that is pretty close to consensus in government in Australia. So not only has Gladys defied what is a kind of established consensus, Kerry Chant has as well. And while Gladys has a political need to, I don't think Kerry Chant has any clear reason to do so. So that's why I feel sorry for Gladys, because she's surrounded, she has a lot of psycho, unhinged people in her orbit, in her political orbit, the most extreme being the ones that are given a platform by the Murdochs, Rupert and Lachlan. But I feel so sad for Kerry Chant, because I'm sure, look, I don't know, I should say, I don't have any inside knowledge here. I'm just speculating, but I cannot believe if we discover that Kerry Chant stood up in a room and said, "Gladys, I will not support you if you choose to lock down." If anyone knows that happened, I will be very apologetic and retract this, but I find it virtually impossible to imagine that Kerry Chant ever advocated the course that Gladys has taken, although of course as the Chief Medical Officer it would have no doubt been in the range of options she put to Gladys when decisions were made. So there, I hope that was not too much of a burden for you, and thanks for listening, and I'll be back shortly. See ya.